We're live now, Pam.
Lovely, Steph. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Planning and Regulatory Committee. The meeting is going to be recorded. Due to COVID-19 red settings, this meeting is being held by audio-visual conference. All members participating via video conference will count for the purpose of the meeting quorum in accordance with clause 25B of Schedule 7 to the Local Government Act 2002. The meeting is being live streamed to Council's YouTube channels. So welcome, and do we have any apologies for today's meeting? No, that is great. And do we have any conflicts of interest for today's meeting? No. Lovely. And we're up to A3, which is public participation, and welcome to both Daphne and Darren this morning. We note just before, Daphne, you're on first, just before we start, to advise that you have 5 minutes speaking, and that Stephanie will indicate when you have one meeting to go and when the time is met the 5 minutes. And then elected members will be able to ask any questions after that time. So welcome, Daphne, and it's good to have you here. Thank you. Daphne, are you there?
I'm here. I'm just waiting for my video.
Oh, lovely.
Steph, do you need to do that?
I can try and start that for you.
Yep, got it.
Great.
No, I think you still have to let me in.
Is that working now for you, Daphne?
I can't see me. Can everybody else see me?
No. Daphne, try the keys Alt and the V together and see if that flicks it on.
No, I'm getting the message. I'm saying start video and clicking on it, but nothing's happening.
That is the only option that we have. Is
Gotcha.
There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
Kia ora, thanks. Tēnā koutou. Nā mihi o te ata, tēnā koutou katoa. O Daphne, guys, lagahu. The purpose of local government is to enable democratic local decision-making and action to promote social, economic, environmental, and cultural well-being. You're elected to give effect and oversight to that purpose. The officer's report today states, the decision on the quarry has been made and the proposal granted. A surprise to many, I'd say maybe to all, apart from council planners and PJ Warren. Maybe even some of you around the table have been blindsided. I was at a public meeting in 2020, along with a number of people from the community, not all neighbours of the quarry, but residents who stated they were worried about the consent and it could have far-reaching detrimental impacts. That the process had been flawed and issues were rife. They wanted you to ensure that all factors were adequately addressed and people with concerns were respected and listened to. They wanted to be an enabled community. Yet instead of engaging, your staff have disabled them. They've not been transparent, open, and possibly fast and loose with facts. So to go from on hold to past without any communication of progress. An external consultant was paid to recommend that the application did not need to be publicly notified. You therefore aimed for the lowest bar that could be set. You did the least you had to do and you achieved the minimum possible. The issue was one of significant public interest. Press coverage of poor process and possible conflicts of interest made it even more so. Maybe it was too hot a potato, had too many annoying people involved, or you just couldn't resist the show of, look who's in charge. Whatever the reason, the outcome has sadly added to the level of distrust between parts of the community and council. Now, I understand that following on from a spatial plan, a meeting on master plan for Featherstone will soon be held. A master plan, that's a bit intimidating, but 213 submissions were received on the spatial plan. 10% was from Featherstone, that's 21 opinions. The Mayor quotes 900. My reference is a document entitled South Wairarapa District Council High Level Spatial Plan Analysis and a council press release saying over 200 responses received. Yep, 213, 21 from Featherstone. I'm not sure what the Mayor's reference is to 900. You're asking us to participate in developing this Featherstone master plan after considering 21 responses. You're asking us to trust that you'll listen to our views, that your consultants who are already developing ideas are prepared to adapt them depending on our feedback. But 21 is such a low number. It doesn't show engagement and trust. And it's not because people in Featherstone don't care or don't have views. I think it's because they think you don't care what they think. How do you build trust when at the same time and time again, this time the quarry, show a total disregard to the concerns raised? You, our elected members, have created a culture of disrespect, where a consultant can tell staff they can ignore ratepayers. You're stating 900 instead of 200. You fool yourselves that you have community engagement. There's a big chance that after the same staff who made the quarry decision are finished with the Featherstone master plan, we'll be here again saying, why didn't you want to listen? So please, show how has the quarry improved the well-being of the residents of Featherstone, South Wairarapa? How have ratepayers enabled to participate in this local decision? And if only 21 Featherstone people commented on your spatial plan, what are you going to do to ensure a greater, more diverse engagement on your grand Featherstone master plan happens? Don't just hold a meeting because a consultant told you is all you have to do to legally comply. Now, I don't know if the consent was right or wrong, but the decision to avoid a conversation and not listen to citizens is always the wrong decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Daphne. Does anybody have any questions for Daphne at this stage? No. Daphne, could we perhaps have a copy of what you've said today, please?
I'll send it through, Steph. Yep.
Lovely. Thank you very much. And thank you for coming to us today. Thank you.
I believe all councillors and the Mayor have received an email from me in a little bit more detail about the quarry.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Did you not get it, Pam?
I haven't seen it as yet, Daphne.
Interesting. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now we have Darren. Are you here with us this morning?
Indeed.
Oh, lovely, Darren. Thank you very much for coming along. You heard that we have 5 minutes, and Stephanie will indicate when you've got 1 minute to go and when time's up. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you. Very briefly, I want to cover 3 things. Obviously, this is about the Featherstone Quarry. I want to cover off what this is not about, what this is generally about, and what this is specifically about. So I think it's really important, given some of the history here, to be very clear about what this is not about. It's not about personalising any matter, although I understand that has occurred, and it's not about NIMBYism. I think the community would accept the quarry if it had acceptable operating conditions. I think if the applicant's listening, they should consider that comment. What it's generally about, and I think Daphne has referred to this, is some wonderful council governance improvement opportunities. So first and foremost is you do have a strategic plan. This consent completely contradicts the urban rural lifestyle objectives and the tourism promotion. You have a spatial where you promote a Featherstone Northern corridor, which will be completely compromised by the 120 60-tonne trucks that drive up and down that corridor all day. Not desirable. And I think definitely really applied to this is the council communication management and engagement. Despite promises of both the council and management, there were 150 plus people at the November 2020 meeting. 18 months have elapsed. No information is provided, and one could get dramatic and say very convenient to drop this as a Friday press release, the sort of thing you'd expect from an unsophisticated political party. And I suppose the big message to me to you is I hope this is not the precedent of your future operating style despite intentions. I suppose the other practical governance matter in relation to transparency is the full consent file should be made available on the Southwark District Council website, rather than wasting your office's time and the community's time trying to fish. The full file should be made available digitally. What this is specifically about, though, is the process that has been used by the Wellington Regional Council and the Southwark District Council to evaluate and assess a 1 million cubic metre hole. This is a 26,000 square metre site where they're going to dig down 4 metres. And you've adopted a process, as our legal advisors have casually called, that is the equivalent of a residential creche sandpit. There's almost a nothing to see a view, which is extraordinary. I can't imagine why this has occurred. We have 3 unknown affected sandpit neighbours or parties, despite the fact there are 50 to 60 direct residents affected by this and the whole Featherston community. The council apparently has applied 24 conditions. For instance, it will operate during working hours. No surprise, really. Has there been consideration made to ensure it doesn't operate during school opening and closing hours in terms of the truck movements? The road's a bit narrow for 2 vehicles. Has anyone been down this road? I challenge the consultants to play the daily chicken run with the 60-tonne speeding trucks with the 500-metre dust bloom behind them. This is ridiculous. The road limit should be reduced to 50 k's, and the council should give residents confidence that they will actively maintain and possibly tar seal the road so it is fit for purpose. There are unspecified noise and air conditions. I mean, if you don't measure things, they don't happen. There should be a noise limit, there should be an air quality limit, there should be an air visual limit, and the council should provide the schedule of controls and monitoring that will show that those will be complied with. We have a boundary buffer. Has anybody been down there and seen the boundary buffer? There is a line of dying 1 metre trees. Anywhere else in New Zealand where these things have occurred, you're looking at 20 to 40 metre boundary buffers with trees 5 to 10 metres high. Effectively, the Wellington Regional Council and the Southwark District Council have been duped, seriously duped, to support the operation of a new $15 to $30 million commercial enterprise at the expense of its ratepayers, who have suffered a large increase of rates and will likely, given the legal action, suffer a larger one. The community will legally challenge this and seek appropriate consent provisions that the council officers should have applied. Our initial assessment is legally that this is likely to be a landmark case in terms of Wellington Regional Council and Southwark District Council consent management incompetence, and it is extremely unfortunate and totally avoidable. Thank you.
Darren, thank you very much. Did anyone have any questions of Darren? No, thank you. Thank you for your thoughts and presentation.
Actually, Pam, I do have a question.
Oh, Councillor Fox.
Thank you. Firstly, Darren, thanks for your presentation. That was really interesting. I'd just like to understand, you've talked about a community meeting where there was 150 people there. Have there been any subsequent community meetings that have taken place prior to this decision?
The first that you has heard of what the update of this decision was Friday press release drop. And I mean, it's really just outraged people. We are not NIMBYs. I mean, I have a 15-hectare property that I could now turn into a quarry at absolutely free cost. It is not a concern. I am not a NIMBY, but I do respect the community, and there are some basic conditions. If you look at these sort of operations elsewhere in the country, there are some basic conditions that give the community confidence that they'll be operated with integrity and protect the community interest. And they're not unreasonable. And yet telling us it's going to operate in working hours. No, really? It would be a very simple matter to say the truck should not be on the road at 8:30 to 9 o'clock or 3 to 3:30. These are very simple conditions. I challenge any of the council, you can come in my Jag, go down the road and see what happens when a 60-tonne truck goes down that road. To be fair, the drivers try their best, but they're obviously running to a schedule. It's a commercial operation. They should be doing no more than 40 to 50 Ks, and there should be lay-bys put on the road so they can pull over and not threaten the residents, as they are now. I mean, within 2 years, the council will be up for a large bill. The main water line to Featherston goes along that road, and every time those trucks go to the side, it's the verges and the site. I imagine, I'm not an engineer, but I imagine the impact of a 60-tonne truck running over a main water main that hasn't been configured for that purpose. There's already been a leak along that road, and I expect there will be many more.
Yeah, you raise a good point with that about the road construction standards in that space. But I just do want to come back to one question, or my initial question, which was subsequent to that first meeting that was held with 150 people. Have you had other unofficial or any other sort of community engagement meetings since then, prior to the decision coming out?
No, we've had no basis to, and we've had no information to.
Okay.
There's been no public, I mean, the fact that this has been released with the view that it did not need to be notified is extraordinary. As I say, it's the equivalent of a residential sandpit, crash sandpit, not a 1 million square cubic metre hole.
I appreciate that. I have one other question too. You've indicated that the community is likely to mount a legal challenge to this particular decision. I'm not trying to lead you down a particular pathway, but I'm really interested to understand the community's appetite for doing this.
Featherston is not a rich community, and it's incurred, like I've had a 50% rate increase, but we have generated sufficient interest and we've sized what's at stake here. I mean, in some ways, the emissions that have occurred make this a cost-effective case to take to the Environment Court. It's unfortunate. I really resent having to do that, but this is necessary. I mean, we are not trying to stop this happening. We just want it to operate respectfully and protect the interests of the wider community.
Yeah, you want to see a suite of different consent conditions is basically what you're indicating, isn't it? Yep, okay. Thanks, Darren. That's all from me, Pam.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor West.
Kia ora, Darren. Thank you for coming along to present today. I just want to get your understanding of the wording that was used in the consent. Is that they? I'm wondering if you can confirm with me whether they said that it may operate within those timeframes. So, is that your understanding of the consent?
I haven't seen the final material, and that's hence why I'd prefer the council put this all available on its website. I don't want to go for a fishing exercise. I don't think that's, as a resident, I think I have the right to know what's happening here and do so in a cost-effective way, not have to fish. As we all know, given this is a 1 million square metre hole, the consent requirements should be very specific. So, for instance, where these have occurred down south, they've had up to 120 conditions, not 24 vague conditions that there will be air quality and noise quality issues. They need to be very specific and the community should be given the confidence the council will actively monitor these conditions. This is not a crash sandpit. This is a 26,000 square metre area that's going to be mined down to a depth of 4 metres. It's a jolly big sandpit, but it is not one.
Could I just interrupt there? I think some of these things will come up in the officer's report later on in the meeting. So, Darren, if you'd like to stay and hear what's discussed at that stage, I think that maybe some of the things you've raised may be covered off in that. So, so with everyone's permission, there's a couple of things I'd like to do under actions from public participation. I've got a piece that I would like to read out, and then I would like to suggest that we don't cover actions from public participation at this stage, that we cover it off in the C1, the Planning and Environmental report, which would then give officers a chance to answer any questions that we have. Is everyone in agreement that we move those actions to that C1? Raise your hand if you do. Thank you. That's great. That's carried. And before we start with that, I'll read that out before we start. So if we move at this stage to item A6, which is minutes for confirmation at this stage, please. I missed A5. So, beg your pardon, we're doing A5. I've done extraordinary business. So if we start again, so if we do A5, extraordinary business, does anyone have any extraordinary business that they would like added to the agenda? No, thank you. Right, A6, minutes for confirmation. We're considering the minutes from the 2nd of February 2022. Are there any corrections needed? Got any corrections? No, thank you. So do I have a mover that the minutes of the Planning and Regulated Committee meeting held on the 2nd of February 2022 are true and correct? Thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Colin. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Carried. Thank you. Right. Let me just get back to here. So we have no decision reports. So if we move to C1, which is the Planning and Environmental Group report. So before we ask Russell to speak to that, I'd just like to make this this comment that a decision has been made with regard to the quarry. A decision has been made by council officers under the Resource Management Act 1991, approving a resource consent for the storage, extraction and crushing of aggregate on a property in Underhill Road, Featherston. It is not appropriate that council make any actions for officers, as this is entirely an operational matter with officers exercising their delegated powers under the RMA. Officers must follow the RMA application and decision-making process as set out in legislation and as prescribed by the operative Wairarapa Combined District Plan. Parties who are concerned about the council's recent decision should seek independent legal advice. So on that note, we will move to C1, the Planning and Environmental Group report. Do I have a mover to receive the report? Thank you, Councillor Fox. Seconded, Councillor Hay. All those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you, carried. Mr. O'Leary, would you like to speak to your report, please?
Good morning, councillors. Thank you, Councillor Colenso. So I'll take you through the planning report, and we will allow due time for response to the resource consent decision matter. So I'll take you through. Just in terms of planning services, we're still getting high numbers of consents in. We're getting some more complex type consents coming in, which we're mindful of giving a due process to, and so still a range of subdivision and a mix of applications coming in, as you'd expect for our district, with its growth coming at us and the development proposals that come before us. In terms of building services, things truck on steadily there, with high numbers of building consents as well, and inspection work to be undertaken. So that's going along there. We've also had the recent biannual audit occur of our BCA function, conducted by IONS, who do their once every 2 years focus as to our processes. And we've had that assessment with people coming in and speaking to myself and Sarah, with manager Sarah doing the due follow-up and us receiving feedback on that. If you want me to pause now and get some further comment from Sarah, would that be suitable, Councillor Colenso?
I think that would be lovely. Thank you, Russell.
So Sarah, do you just want to give some comment, please, in terms of the audit focus points?
Yeah, sorry, I won't do my video on. I don't know how to change it because it's on my back camera, obviously. So the audit was due to start the week that we went into the red light system. So we had to make a quick change over the weekend before they came to it being a remote assessment. So Graham did a great job getting them all set up with everything they needed really quickly, because generally a remote assessment takes at least a day longer than it would normally if they were here in the office. But they managed to get through it in the 4 days that they had, which was a credit to everybody involved, really. The assessors, worked really speedily to get through it all, because they also had time restraints with other audits they were doing the following week and things like that. So most days I spent on Teams with the auditors, just helping clear up a few things, giving them the information that they needed. They were quite happy with everything that we did, but obviously they always find something. We ended up with 24 general non-compliances, 4 of which we cleared while they were here still. We've submitted an action plan to clear the other 20, and which they have accepted. And so now we've got, I think it's mid-April that we are due to have them cleared by. So we're working through that at the moment. Yeah, that's basically it.
Thanks for that, Sarah.
Yeah, that's lovely, Sarah. Thank you. Just before we go to questions of Sarah, I would just like to offer our team's congratulations to Sarah and her team for having successfully completed their audit. I know it's very stressful when anybody does any sort of audit, and having to do it online must have been doubly so. So just please pass on our thanks and appreciation for the work that you do through the year and on having completed the audit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hay.
Thank you, Pam. Thanks very much, Sarah. And I know it's a lot of hard work, these audits, so well done. Just, can you just give me a flavour? You mentioned in the report it was focused on record keeping. Can you just give me a sort of sense of the things they were concerned about? Just a flavour.
In relation to the record keeping,
Yeah.
So that was about, a lot of it was in relation to emails not being put onto the building file, so the final record, and mostly in relation to when people apply for an extension. We have that correspondence with them via email, but those emails weren't being held on file.
Okay.
So that's really what that was focused around.
Great. So fairly minor in the
Yeah, it
scheme of things. Yeah.
Yes.
Lovely. Thanks very much, Sarah.
Councillor Olds.
Yeah, no, thanks. And thanks through you, Madam Chair. Thanks very much, Sarah. Yeah, I just had a question very similar to that of Councillor Hay in terms of corrective actions. And I was just reading the report again and noted they were more administrative in terms of record keeping. So I guess that there were no other corrective actions from this audit that needed to be undertaken at this stage. Is that correct?
You sorry, in relation to record keeping, or?
Yeah, so outside record keeping, there were no other corrective actions in the audit?
So they call them general non-compliances rather than corrective actions. Yeah, they changed the terminology.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are the 20 that we are dealing with. So they range from things like the auditing. So that's our internal auditing processes. Yeah, and a few other procedural matters. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Councillor West.
Kia ora, Sarah. Thank you for giving us an update on the audit. So how often it's a biannual audit?
It's every 2 years. Yeah.
Okay. And compared to the last time that the audit was performed, how are we doing?
Much the same. I believe our last audit, I think we, from memory, got around 18 general non-compliances in the last one. And yeah, so they tend to focus on different things every time they come. So although, you know, we do our best to try and keep up with all the changes, there are things that slip a little bit occasionally. And so that's why they come, just to make sure that we're on track.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Mr. O'Leary.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. So in terms of environmental services, covering bylaws, dog control, officers are working remotely in that sphere, but responding to inquiries. As has been noted in the past, the topic still rolls on of investigation of noise issues associated with operation of gas cannons near to residential properties. So that's a recent focus point for officers there, following up things that are raised to us. I've left topics in terms of background proposed legislative change. As you'll recall, the Natural and Built Environments Act is the core of the revamped RMA, and then we've got the Strategic Planning Act, which is the integrated strategic and spatial planning focus for councils, with the impetus behind the change being the importance of having a more regionally anchored focus for dealing with RMA issues, both in terms of plans and linkage between regional plans and district plans, and also the regional growth planning and the due linkage there for what cities or district councils are doing in terms of their forward work in terms of growth. So we will hear more on that as the legislative developments roll out. Next topic, Southwark Spatial Plan.
Russell, excuse me interrupting. Do you think that we could maybe just, because we've got our speakers sitting listening, maybe we could move 1.8 forward and just take that out of context? Would that be okay just before we go through the spatial plan and things like that? Would that be acceptable to yourself and your officers that are here?
Yeah, I think that's responsive and due respect to the members of the public sitting there. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of the resource consent application, I I can take you through the key components of the application we received and the processing parts, and then incur and respond to questions further. We've got councillors with their hands up there. So, Madam Chair, how much do you want me to say as prior overview?
Whichever way you would like to handle it, Russell, whether you want to do an overview and then answer any questions, or whether you would like to maybe which way would you like to handle it?
Well, I'll give a brief overview, and then we can respond to matters as we go through.
Lovely, thank you.
So, noting that the application was made in October 2020, and we did have a large public meeting which was held in Featherston, whereby I was present with previous planning manager Godwill Mahoa, plus there were representatives from Greater Wellington Regional Council, and the focus of that meeting was to give a forward outline as to explanation of consent process and ability to outline that for both district and regional council. The resource consent has involved a great deal of interplay in terms of presentation of reports by the applicant, and officers taking opportunity to have respective peer reviews of the technical reports, and the application has been handled independently through a practicing planner from Boffa-Miskell, and then upon receipt of the report, both myself, James and Kendall have looked at prospective and potential resource consent conditions, as well as doing the required component of checking potential resource consent conditions with the applicant. So the matters of acoustical assessment has been undertaken in line with looking at what the noise levels for the rural zone are, and those current rural noise limits are 55 dBA, measured from a notional boundary, which is a 20-metre distance from an existing dwelling, and then canvassing, comparing what the applicant put in, and having the acoustic report peer reviewed and looking at the extent of parties affected, as well as the applicant supplying, underdoing some consultation and supplying the signatures of 3 affected parties as part of that. There was also, in terms of, as you would imagine, careful consideration of traffic impacts, and also dust, and also a check as to, in terms of liaison with the applicant, as to on-site management practice to mitigate or reduce any of the potential effects. So the decision is essentially for a resource consent is at 2 levels in terms of your notification decision, and looking at the potential effects given the setting and surrounding neighbours, and then the latter or final decision of whether a council is going to grant consent or not, and within that latter part, there's also a careful consideration as to the extent of resource consent conditions applicable to the nature of the proposal. So that's a very sort of higher level encompassment of the interplay that's happened with it. I acknowledge that the decision was released Friday, and that there was not any subsequent public meeting or smaller scale public meeting within Featherston, but the nature of the decision has been based on the evaluation of the applicant's material, testing that and asking questions, seeking peer review where it's relevant, receiving those peer review technical reports, weighing up expert advice from those technical experts, particularly noise and traffic, liaising with Waka Kotahi, that's also been involved, and also receiving the comment from internal our internal traffic advisors as to traffic matters as well. Yeah, that's if I leave it at that point in terms of general overview, and we can get into questions and further information coming forth in response to the questions.
All right, thank you, Mr. O'Leary. Alex, Mayor Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Russell. There's been a couple of public participants querying some aspects of this. To my mind, given that no councillors, the CEO, the CFO, no one has a right to intrude in the process of an RMA decision. Can you comment on the legality or the ability for discretion with regards to what is deemed an affected party with regards to this consent? Because I understand that under the RMA, you are very prescribed with regards to identification of these, and to possibly widen the scope may be illegal or counter to result in a lawsuit from the applicant. Can you comment on that?
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a very good question. Essentially, within resource consent work, you're straddling the realm of public good and consideration of potential effects. You're also dealing with development proposals and the potential for a development to go ahead. So there's that public and private consideration linking to all the issues that you have to carefully assess. Your question focuses on consideration or extent of discretion around the RMA and notification procedures. So and that brings in the avenues of limited notification, whereby and public notification. Public notification, the effects associated with the elements of the use would have to be more than minor to warrant public notification. Limited notification, the threshold is slightly lower, but both that determination, which was done by the independent consultant from BOFA, was done in line with checking the material and counsel and consideration of peer review of initial information presented. So you're also straddling clarifying points as well as making that determination, and also considering to what extent the applicant has gone to and undertaken either on-site management practice or noise testing and individual approach to adjoining neighbours. So that has been all within the mix there. We can get, I would also suggest, if we get into questions, that we have James as well on hand for any fine grain exploration of the process.
So thank you.
Madam Chair, the quick answer to that is yes, there are very strict legal tests about determining who is affected, and it's not just it's not a discretion. It's not something the council can. You've got to make the test relate to people who are actually affected by the activity, And that effect is often prescribed by boundaries and noise levels which are set in the district plan. So it is a very specific process. There are rights incumbent on both parties, the appellant and submitters, or potential submitters, and we have to make the decision on balance. And James can answer the specifics of it, but that's what really essentially what it boils down to.
Okay, unless James is going to clarify, I have a supplementary. Sorry, Rebecca, I know you're next. But to what extent does the granting of this consent change the character, intensity, and scale of the consent that was granted, again, with without any discussion with the South Wairarapa District Council previously to operate a quarry?
Sorry, Alex, are you referring to the GWRC?
Yes. So to what extent does this consent granted by the South Wairarapa under the RMA change the character, intensity, and scale of the current, the Greater Wellington consent?
It doesn't change. It doesn't change the nature of the consent that was granted by GWRC. But there are aspects of GWRC's consent that equally relate to conditions that are enforceable, for instance, dust, those types of things as well. So they have to be seen in conjunction. There are different conditions that relate to both parties, and the separate parties have different enforcement or accountabilities in terms of consent conditions.
Thank you. Mr. O'Leary, you were going to say something.
Yeah, the two consents are issued respectively under the relative responsibility of each of the councils. So they sit together with the consent holder for the proposed activity, and for them to respond with conditions that are applied to each of the individual consents that apply to the site.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Alex, did you have any other questions? Lovely, thank you. Councillor Fox.
Thank you. I think it would be really helpful, particularly for our public that are still with us, if they could actually hear in detail, or if we can provide in detail to them the affected parties test. I think that's where there's quite a bit of debate to be had in the community, and probably some understanding. So if we could do that, that would be useful. I think if people get a good understanding of that, that's one thing. The second part is, Darren Goulding asked the question, is whether or not the full file for the consent could be put up on the website so it's accessible. Can that be done?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Fox. Yes, we can do that. That's being focused on, and we will have on the website, the intent is to have the application from Mr. Warren on the website. We'll have the assessment report and decision, and we'll have the accompanying reports of scientific or technical reports that were considered as part of this decision.
Okay.
Excuse me, Rebecca, could I interrupt? James, you wanted to say something there.
Yeah, so the intention was, yeah, my apologies. The intention was to have all that information up on Friday. We've had some difficulty getting that up to support the press release. It could already be up this morning, I suspect. And we've also put in there, we've been working on a question and answer sheet that should accompany that report. So that could already be on our website as of now.
Okay. And my final question for the moment relates to the spatial plan. So I'd actually looked at the decision to issue consent, and then thought about that in the context of the spatial plan as well. I'd just be interested, we've got a community meeting coming up in Featherston on the 30th regarding the spatial plan. I suspect that this is going to be a hot topic, and it might be helpful to have some good conversation around the mixed uses of land in the area as it relates to the spatial plan, and explain those to our community, and be prepared to listen to what the community actually see in that whole development, because this is clearly, the decision has clearly blindsided our community. this is obviously not what they were expecting to hear, and I'd be really disappointed if we weren't able to engage in a genuine conversation with them on the 30th around the planning in that particular part of the district.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Fox. It's a good point. We need to do that. Clarification. So the meeting on the 30th is for the Featherston Master Plan, which is the focus of essentially the town and the urban potential of the town, which draws in commercial, residential, and the potential of mixed use. So this is a periphery surrounding rural area, but we need to be mindful and receive that feedback from the community in terms of the peripheral area and what those concerns are.
But the activity in the peripheral area is going to have an impact on the town, and that is what people will want to discuss and have heard and understand. You know, vehicle movements from this operation will still have an impact on the community, and I think, you know, we can't probably distinguish completely the rural and the urban in this conversation, I think. So that's all I've got to say, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Webb?
Sorry, can I just ask a question of clarification from Rebecca? Her first question was clarity around who has been affected and how that decision was made.
Yes, that's right.
Rebecca, did you want that answered now? Or did you want, because there is the notification decision is actually written down about, so there's a paper that actually explains that all that, and that will be part of the information we post on the website as well. But the question is, did you want to explain now, or are you happy to see it in writing, because it's quite a lengthy explanation?
Both. If you're able to give a précis of that now for people still on this meeting and listening, that would be useful, I think.
Okay. James, could you help here, please? Quick version.
You're on mute, James.
Yeah, I'll do my best. Again, this is a process. So obviously there are a number of matters based on experience in terms of the types of effects that quarries tend to do or tend to create. The key amongst those are matters like dust, vehicle movements, and noise. So and also some visual effects as well. So there is a range of matters that we've fed in. The short story is, when we look at the tests and the relevant parts of the Act, which is 95B and 95E of the Resource Management Act, it talks about things that you can do as of right and a comparison between those and the proposed activities, and effects that are minor or more than minor depending on the test. We examined some of the initial reports that were provided, including noise and transport. We felt there were some shortcomings in those in terms of identifying, particularly around the noise. We've got a peer review of that report. That peer review was provided to the applicant and also to a number of interested parties in the community who've been engaged with staff, I guess, constantly in terms of my period of employment with council here. So we've been providing the information when we've had it to those parties. My understanding that those parties have been discussing those matters in the community. And subsequently, in terms of transport, we've everyone has aligned in terms of their assessment that the wider effects, the effects on the community, on the roading, the road is fit for purpose in terms of what they're proposing. That's in the detail. So how that decision was made, you need to look at the reports. And similarly with the noise, the initial noise report was, I guess, an assumed model. So the report that we did, the peer review that we undertook, identified some of the shortcomings and I guess the robustness of that report. So to fill those gaps, the applicant undertook what was something very similar to airports, and that is, you get on the site, you monitor the noise environment, the existing noise environment, then you run your machinery and you identify where that machinery is going to be, and you generate noise contours. So those noise contours in particular identify where there is compliance or non-compliance or various levels of non-compliance on the ground based on real world experience here, so operating their equipment. And there's a few other factors around acoustic expertise that were factored in as well. And again, it identified a specific area in terms of noise. So the next point remaining is dust. There are some very straightforward requirements around dust, around dust conditions that basically set out the expectations. So these have been applied in both the GWRC consent and our consent. So it talks about off-site deposition of dust. So those are well understood. I understand that they're required to have equipment on site and use it where we're required to avoid off-site deposition of dust. So in terms of the three key matters, transport, we have expert evidence to tell us that the road was fit for purpose. We have noise that tells us that noise reports that tell us where there isn't non-compliance. We have robust conditions around dust that are quite explicit around the expectations. So the three big key matters have largely settled. And I think while there is some criticism about not having an announcement or a meeting prior to the delivery of the decision, I think regardless of the outcome, we possibly wouldn't satisfy those parties, and also potentially puts us in a position where there is implications that there was an ability to input legally into that process and actually influence that process without a finding of notification or limited notification, which also presents an element of legal risk. As I say, we've been in discussions. There's numerous lagoimas which are on record with a number of parties throughout this process that we've been talking about where we are with it. Any application can be on hold today and granted tomorrow, unfortunately. And I don't think there was going to be any particularly sensitive and appropriate way to kind of deliver the message, unfortunately.
James, you mentioned compliance and non-compliance with noise. I think you sort of missed a trick here. So the district plan prescribes an acceptable noise level, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Yeah. Okay. So the test that is being applied is if the noise level is within the district plan, it is compliant. Therefore, no one is affected. Is that correct?
There's a little bit more. No, that's not strictly correct. I'm sorry, Harry, but it's the bulk of the correctness. There's also some other matters around types of noise, but the expert finding was that the types of noise weren't inappropriate for the location.
In a rural activity, that's right. Because I mean, that's the heart of Rebecca's question. As you're saying, because people say, I'm likely to be able to hear this, therefore I'm affected, right?
Yeah.
And but what I just want you to describe is that there's actually a test that prescribe the boundary at which noise is deemed to be, for want of a better term, reasonable, given the context of a rural environment. And so it's only those people beyond the immediate boundary of the property where that is deemed to be unreasonable that would be considered to be affected. That's correct?
Yeah, and that's something we've been wrestling with in terms of our communications. Is an effect is not necessarily an adverse effect, and that's a very good point, Harry. Or a change is not necessarily an adverse effect, and the same thing applies to the road. Where the road is deemed appropriate or fit for purpose, a change in its use is not necessarily deemed an adverse effect. And similarly, exactly as Harry has prescribed there, a change in the noise environment is not necessarily considered an adverse effect. It's very difficult points to communicate.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Rebecca, does that help? I mean, it was just trying to get the heart of that. So in other words, it's a very, very nuanced decision about who is actually affected in the meaning of the RMA, versus someone who believes that they may be affected simply because there'll be a change in the environment. Yeah, and that's a decision making we have to make.
Yeah, I think it's important to describe that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Right, thank you. Councillor West.
Oh, question for James or for whoever can actually answer the question. What's the crushing process involve when you're actually crushing items? I understand that you may need water in order to assist with that process.
I'm not over the top of that, Councillor West, unfortunately. I'm not sure whether it's a dry or a wet process. My understanding is that this proposal is a dry process.
Was that not part of the consent though? Was that not part of the application for them to describe that activity?
It has been described. I'm just not over the detail on it, I'm afraid.
Okay, because that just want to cast our minds back to an instance where we had the Greytown Medical Centre, and they were applying for a footpath. And for whatever reason, a holistic view wasn't given to incorporate the ability to have a footpath, and hence council had to then consider putting a footpath in. And when we have a look at the holistic view of the quarry, and it's not just about the quarry, but it's the impact that it has during its operation. And I understand that if consideration has been given to the widening of the booms and the impact of that, not only on the Featherston's only water pipe, but also Featherston's wastewater that runs along Underhill Road.
Yep.
And the additional cost of maintaining Underhill Road, who's going to pay for that? I guess the ratepayers are, which is a bit unfortunate. Has that been taken into consideration as to the actual cost and impact of that?
So I've got answers for two of your questions. Number one, my understanding was that actually the footpath was initially proposed by the Crossroads developers and then removed during the process before my time, councillor, but that's my understanding. So that wasn't something that was necessarily driven by our assessment. Number two, my understanding is we definitely took into consideration those pipes when making those decisions around the road surface and those issues. So that was a matter that was factored in. And in terms of the impact on the road, I don't have an answer to that question for you. It went past council's roading manager with the information attached. So I probably can't give you more of an answer than that today, I'm afraid.
And just to quickly, just with regards to dust, when dust gets wet, it turns into dirt. And then dirt kind of like travels out, it has a potential for travelling outside the boundary. Again, we're having a look at the holistic view. I understand that the Longwood Raceway goes along the side of that property or through that property. I'm just wondering if any consideration had been given to the environmental effects of dust getting into the waterways or dust getting onto the neighbouring properties, affecting the growth of the plants. Just wondering if that had been considered.
Yep, so some of that is within our ambit and some of that's within Greater Wellington's ambit. So the environmental matters are largely within GWRC's remit. In terms of the other matters, look, there was dust conditions applied that should avoid those situations from occurring.
Yeah, and just one final question, and this is probably pretty pertinent for our community. What is the complaint process?
So as part of the consent conditions, well, there's always pick up the phone to council. That always is available. Part of the conditions are that we are requiring the quarry to maintain a complaints register. So you can also complain to the quarry itself, which would most likely get a more immediate response than ringing up council and waiting for council staff to go out on site and witness something that's going on and then direct a corrective action if necessary. But we've built in those processes, and we've also got some monitoring conditions, including noise, that we've set up to kind of ensure that, you know, what our understanding of the consent is and what we've agreed to is upheld by the operation of that quarry.
That would assume that if there is a complaint and it is confirmed that the complaint is substantial, it then poses the fact that the operation is running non-compliantly. So how do we get an overview to make sure that they remain compliant?
So look, as I say, we've got ongoing monitoring conditions. We also have a review condition applied, which we would use if, for example, there are continuing or multiple non-compliances or a situation where they weren't able to comply. That process allows us to open up that consent again and look at those key issues if we're having ongoing non-compliance and ensure that those are adequately addressed.
Oh, and just with regards to other quarries that have been operating.
Excuse me, Brenda. Russell, did you want to comment on that question that Brenda asked before she goes on to her next one? Thank you.
Two minor points. Thank you, Madam Chair. In terms of the original question about noise and the nature of the machinery, so we had two specialists there. We had Styles Group on behalf of the applicant. We had Marshall Day on behalf of, as a peer review, acting for us. And we had on-site testing of practice and trialling and use of the equipment. So that was factored in as part of final peer review result there. In terms of the latter point that's been raised as to any element of non-compliance, we've been proactive and as James has mentioned, in terms of capturing a consent condition to keep our ears open for any aspects of non-compliance. And as part of interplay between us and the applicant, both the applicant's consultant and the applicant would have been advised of the potential of that condition being imposed on the resource consent. So we will need to duly follow up any instance of non-compliance, and that has been discussed or posed before that condition was set within the decision.
And just one final question. I probably have lots more, but
yes.
Okay. Getting back to what Darren had mentioned with regards to other quarries having 120 conditions, how hard is it for council to apply further conditions on the consent, or is the current conditions, that's what it is, that's all we can do?
Yeah, look, I think so. Some of the extraction activities are referring to. There's a couple in Canterbury that are sort of much substantially larger and perhaps have much more nuanced issues. So as it is now, there is opportunity to amend conditions particularly if there's evidence that there are effects that are not either not anticipated or the existing conditions are not appropriate, particularly for things like dust, noise, and traffic. So there is an ability, but what that does require is operation to kind of drive that in the future.
Oh, thank you, James.
So I'll just clarify, the number of conditions had to be relevant to the number of effects that you actually have. So the quarries vary in size, type, and scale, and I've been involved with quarry applications, inquiring consent. So if you have quarries that lead into hillsides, they're very different. If they're near water with sediment controls, batters, removing overburden, storage of overburden. So the number of consents is not number of conditions is not an indicator of the quality of the document. It really affects to other conditions suitable to control the effects that are legal effects to be considered in the RMA.
Thank you.
Could I, just before we go to Councillor Hay, just one of Councillor West's questions, James, could you answer this for me? If somebody in the public wishes to lay a complaint, you've said to put that to PJ Warren first, is it appropriate to copy council into that complaint so that you're aware of what's going through, or is the register that PJ Warren needs to keep on those complaints adequate for your requirements?
So look, I guess in terms of a responsive immediate actions to avoid the effect, PJ Warren, I would suggest, would be a quick call if there are, but certainly council is accountable for monitoring and enforcement of any non-compliance. So the regulatory responsibility is with us. I think if you want a very quick outcome to a serious issue, the best people to talk to would be the operator. And that doesn't mean you can't talk to us, but certainly if it requires enforcement or just more clarification or support from council to ensure that they're operating with those conditions, we are accountable for undertaking those tasks.
Okay, thank you. Brenda, have you finished? Lovely. Councillor Hay, thank you for waiting.
That's okay. Thank you. Actually, quite a few of my questions have been answered, but just a couple of extra ones. I'm not sure that's Russell or James. Can you confirm that with this new consent being granted that they are paying commercial, not rural rates? Are you able to help me with that?
Oh, that's not really a matter for
landing, I know, but
to consider. But I think it would be better to talk with Charlie and Katrina's team on that.
Okay, well, maybe you can, Katrina can get back to. So just regard to monitoring of the noise and pollution levels, have you set out a regular period, like every quarter it gets monitored, or by yearly, or have you got a program that's been built into the consent for monitoring noise and pollution?
There's a couple of things. Initially, we prefer that the cost and active responsibility for compliance is with the applicant. So they need to come up with something that's satisfactory. Part of the conditions of consent is a noise management plan, which they are to provide before they begin work. And within that, we do have a review within 12 months of operation within the conditions of consent to confirm their operating conditions. So we've got that in place, and following that, we'd probably use our discretion, but we would also rely on feedback from the community in terms of operating noise as to whether we would need to intervene or do further checks.
Thank you, James. Russell, you wanted to sorry, Lee, Russell wanted to add something.
Yeah, that was a good point made by James in terms of responding to compliance issues, both and having those conversations with the consent holder. To Councillor Hayes' first question as to rating impact. So the resource consent goes for a resource consent decision. The consent goes with the land. This has not changed the zoning of the land. It is a land use consent for the respective components applied for. So just wishing to clarify that point for you in terms of helping you understand.
Great, thank you, Russell. Just a final question, and it's been partially answered, but my assumption would be that there would be an impact on the roads, trucks going up and down. Is there, as part of consent, any sort of developer or business commercial contribution to roads as part of the consent, or is any funding that has to come from the company?
So we didn't receive any advice that was required, so it hasn't been applied.
So the cost of any improvements to the road will fall squarely on the shoulders of SWDC.
So the immediate requirements that they have in terms of widening the access, etc., is on the applicant. I would suggest that there, again, like everything, Councillor, there's probably a little bit more nuance in it than that. Probably more about in the eroding asset management side of things and the legislation governing that. But it wasn't a recommendation made to us as part of the resource management side of it. So there's perhaps further questions to be asked of the appropriate team on those issues, whether there's another way of resolving that issue.
Great, lovely. Thanks so much, James and Russell.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Lee. Mayor Alex?
Yeah, one comment that was made in public participation was regards to possibly looking at the speed limit along the road. And I understand even though the district plan is going through, we won't be seeing the effects of that for a couple of years. Possibly a question for you, Harry, is whether or not there is an ability to temporarily change the speed limit outside the district plan, and what consultation will be required prior to enacting that.
You don't need to change the district plan to change the speed limit. Remember, our intention was to do a comprehensive review across the district rather than piece by piece. The current process is a bylaw process, so we can do that if we so wish. But remember, the plan was to try and do a comprehensive speed review right across the district, because we get multiple requests for changing speed limits, particularly at the peri-urban boundary of towns and those types of things. So yeah, long story short, we can do it, and we can do it piece by piece, or we can do it comprehensively. It's really up to you.
It might be that specifically for this issue that we look at doing this separately. But the next question is what consultation is required to do that.
There is a part of the bylaw making process requires consultation with the community about the appropriateness of the speed and those types of things. And yeah, I'd be very surprised if people didn't support actually lowering the speed limit.
Cool. Just one more comment as well, which a response to a comment made by Councillor West with regards to the Greytown footpath. That's quite incorrect. That there was always a need for a footpath identified. It was the onus of responsibility to provide that. So just thought I'd correct that for the record.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Mary Alex. Colin, Lold.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. Very interesting conversations occurring, and thanks very much to James and Russell for going into some detail with some of the answers to some of the questions. I guess mine's a little bit more generic in terms of safety concerns along that road and corridor, and in particular is the proposed cycle trail across the Taraniko River, or the bridge across the Taraniko River, and access to that. And personally, I'd like to see us move forward a little bit and see if we can mitigate some of the concerns that have been raised in terms of that road and corridor. And it's probably more of a statement than a question, but and probably something to be discussed further at Assets and Services. But other than that, thank you very much.
Thank you. I have just one small question, if that's okay. When the trucks are moving from the gate of the quarry into the town, or moving towards their end their destination end, is there any requirement to have those vehicles covered? Because I've been behind aggregate trucks before, and the little stones fly everywhere over cars. It creates, especially on an unsealed road, it creates an extra level of dust over and above the what is the vehicle is actually bringing up from the road surface. And I think that, you know, is that requirement, is there a requirement for the vehicles to be covered? Because I see that as an issue, and dust flying at a higher level, the impact on cars and people walking along that road, the impact of that on cyclists and things.
Yeah, I can answer that question. There's two answers to that question. I did ask questions about the nature of the truck and coverage and things like that, as there was a complaint. However, I've been following up a complaint from an Underhill Road resident. I rang Mr. Ryan and said, "Hey, look, what's going on here? This is a complaint that we've received," and it turns out the issue was most likely not that resulting from his operation, but his answer was essentially they're very high-sided trucks. They're only about a third fill to kind of avoid that situation. So there's not necessarily a requirement to cover it, but they are the material should well and truly stay within the vehicle. The second answer is that that is also enforceable by the police as well, unsecured load. So if it does occur, there are ways and means of enforcing that and ensuring that it does not occur.
Yeah, I'm very mindful of that because you get a lot of downdraft off the hills in that area coming down, which seems to blow things up, as well as the dust on the road. It blows what's on the trucks up, and that has a concern for me as well. So thank you. No other questions? Right, we've been going for an hour and 20 minutes. Would everyone like to have a 5-minute break before we go on with the rest of Russell's report?
Yes, please.
Great.
Thank you.
Steph, if we could stop the recording and have that 5-minute break, please.
Yeah, we'll do that.
Lovely, thank you. Thank you, everyone.